Baron Devonus arrived at the court of King Cordal, humbly requesting audience. He explained that he had been stripped of his lands in Vistria by the Duke of Archtide for transgressions he had not committed, the evidence fabricated by a rival. Though his status, by his own admission, placed him near the bottom of the noble class, this baron of uncertain descent not only carried himself well, but proved a lively and insightful speaker. When a member of the court was so gracious as to host him for a time, Devonus proved an entertaining guest. He told grand tales, made wise and clever comments, and soon his presence was much in demand. He earned great favor among the entire court of the White Throne. Indeed, all the royalty of Korstraad was frequently invited back to the palace as well, and ever his place at the banquet moved closer to the high seat, the peaked throne which gleamed ever in his eye, his back carved in a likeness of the great winter palace itself, made wholly of white gold, and yet crafted with such art that the finish protected the soft metal from dents or deformations, even as the king gained in weight and girth. As the years passed, Devonus became one of the king's most trusted advisors, and he distinguished himself as a negotiator in disputes with the Rallowhigh and Karhai tribes, and distinguished himself with valor in border skirmishes with the cowardly orcs of Uruk, and later as a leader against the mystical Cold Riders when they attacked the kingdom from the Feywild. So a few years later, when King Cordal turned 50 and was still without an heir, many were surprised that he designated Baron Devonus as his successor, but few could fault the Baron's worthiness, and fewer still were willing to stand up and argue for the birthright of the king's closest living relative, Monorail IV, who was a very young second cousin twice removed. Devonus was as humble as ever during the ceremony that declared him heir presumptive to the throne of Korstraad, and rather than bask in the honor, he rode out the very next day to continue the difficult negotiations with Gargama, leader of the nomadic Karhai tribe. The Baron had to be recalled early, though, less than a week later, for the king had taken ill. Within a month, King Cordal was dead, and Devonus was crowned King of Korstraad, Lord of the Winter Palace. In the meantime, war broke out among the barbaric tribes of the northern wastes. There had not been open warfare between the nomads in more than 4 centuries, but the Karhai, led by Gargama the Cyclops, attacked the Vinhai, seeking to steal the mystical heirlooms of their ancestors, the hunting sashes they called Kushak-Garai. The Vinhai elders tried to reason and sought to convene the Council of the Winds, the leaders of the 4 tribes, but Gargama's scouts caught and killed their messengers, and the hulking one-eyed man had no interest in talking. He led his warriors charging into the Vinhai camp, impaling hunters on his long stabbing axe, then freeing the weapon by tearing it out through their sides. The men and women of the Vinhai were no weaklings, though, for they too were nomadic hunters of the north, slayers of large bears, and in his advance the huge Gargama was stayed by Hinzay, one of the youngest hunters to have earned his Kushak-Garai sash. And their battle became legend. And even as they fought, Gargama bragged to him that the king had promised him the lands north of Ice River, that he would be a duke in the Winter Palace. But Hinzay told him that to pretend to own the land rather than being a part of it was to abandon what it meant to be a hunter, a nomad of the tribes. And when the battle ended, young Hinzay stood over Gargama's body, so drenched in both of their blood that his sash was forever stained, and from then on both friend and foe named him Hinzay the Red Sash. Meanwhile, ruling from the Red Throne, King Devonus seemed a man transformed, for though his bearing was no less than before, his countenance no less comely than it had been, and his presence no less commanding, his commands were such that hurt the hearts of those who had to obey them, for he reinforced the powers of the aristocratic class above those of the people, and the people came to be known as peasants and as a lower class of men, whose sole undertaking was to toil in support of the ever-swelling excesses of the nobles. Duchess Sunderland saw the changes happening and met the king to discuss them, seeking to understand, to know his mind. And Devonus was charming, reassuring. He said everything she had wanted to hear to allay her concerns, and she returned to her castle and immediately arranged for the former king's young cousin to be smuggled down to the Elven lands, because face to face with Devonus, now that he wore the crown, she could sense his malice in her very bones. But while young Monorail escaped, the Duchess died to an assassin's blade 3 months later. In time, the remnants of the Karhai tribe were defeated by the Vinhai, and the leaders of the other tribes met and exiled the aggressors from the Council of the Winds. So when the Red Sash recovered from his wounds, he turned his gaze west to the capital of the City Men, traveling there as representative of the Vinhai tribe, seeking an audience with the king. But the wise and suspiciously prescient monarch instead had Hinzay thrown in the new cells he had ordered delved into the rock beneath the Winter Palace. And there the warrior lay in darkness for the rest of the summer, and then the whole of autumn, and then the winter. For more than 2 years he saw not the light of day, nor any spark or candle, nor did King Devonus send him to the games in his new Colosseum, where so many other prisoners met a violent end, for the Tyrant had been warned of Hinzay's prowess by the shade of Gargama, whom the Red Sash had slain. But one of the Dark King's newly appointed tyrants, Duke Ikoro, seeking to impress King Devonus with his brazen cruelty, secretly moved Hinzay, the Red Sash, from the prisons beneath the Winter Palace, placing him in the gladiatorial games to be shattered in combat, forcing him to fight with his hands bound by mithril manacles. When King Devonus saw the nomad enter the arena from his seat in a royal box, he was furious, but dared not show it before the noblesse because he would lose face. And so he brooded in growing, barely contained rage as, despite bound hands, Hinzay triumphed over one, then another armed gladiator. First embarrassed, and then increasingly worried, as Hinzay won fight after unfair fight, Duke Ikoro ordered unleashed the caged white dragon, Sharganath. Defeated by Devonus himself, then imprisoned for years, beaten and taunted by the guards, and with her wings shorn off to keep her in the arena, Sharganath had been reduced from the wise sovereign of her lonely mountain realm to a hungry and disheveled, almost beast-like state. Hinzay met the wary creature's eye, and in that moment, in that look, Sharganath understood that this little man could grant her a release from suffering and more, that dying at his hands would allow her to strike back against her captors. She lunged at him, but somehow the dragon's steel-like teeth severed the manacles, freeing Hinzay's hands. He slew the dragon with the weapon of a fallen champion, and raised the sword in challenge at the king. King Devonus was so infuriated by Duke Ikoro's incompetence, so prideful at his own strength, and so furious at this barbarian's insult, that he rose from his throne, as though against his will. Now all the nobles and many of his subjects could see the impudent challenge, and by his own reaction, they knew that he had seen it. He had to accept or to lose face. Such was his own reputation as a warrior. And so the usurper king donned his full armor. He strode down the aisle, passing Ikoro without even a glance. Wielding the sovereign sword of Korstraad, he leapt from the bleachers of the arena down to the sandy gladiatorial pit, plummeting more than 5 men's height, raising a ring of dust from the impact. He stood straight after the fall, which would have killed a lesser man, and twirled his sword in a brief, understated display of prowess, as he faced down this bloodied, unarmored challenger, from whose wrists still hung the broken manacles. All eyes were upon the two, the prisoner and the king, such that only those seated next to the Duke even noticed as he collapsed, his racing heart failing him. And so began the greatest duel ever sung of in all the North. The sovereign sword had been forged by Moradin himself for the first king ever to sit in the Winter Palace, and the crude weapons salvaged by Hinzay could scarcely withstand it. The Red Sash deflected the blows as best he could, but the one time he was forced to block full on, he was nearly slain as his blade split in twain. Yet he continued fighting with half a sword, even though the blows delivered by Devonus were like the crushing darkness of an avalanche. Hinzay was already tired from his previous battles, including slaying the dragon. When he feared his heavy arms would not have the strength to deflect another death blow, he leapt back for breathing room, and though the leap looked easy for him, so far back and so high did he soar that it appeared to all who watched that he could have leapt over the arena walls and into the audience at any time. Yet he had chosen to fight each opponent, even the white dragon, and now the warrior king himself. Devonus did not leap after him, but advanced steadily like a juggernaut, and as he strode forward, he plunged his sword into one, then another of the bodies of defeated gladiators, flinging them scornfully at his opponent. And those who watched high above in the stands would swear that each body shrieked at his sword's touch, though they had been dead for many minutes. Hinzay dodged the corpses, panting and trying to regain his wind for another assault. As King Devonus drew closer, he suddenly charged. His footsteps shook the earth, the entire Winter Palace. He slashed at an angle through the ground as he ran, slicing with such force that the dust rose in a massive suffocating cloud to blind Hinzay, and Devonus streaked down from the air, seeking to end it with a single strike. But the red sash bounded back, avoiding the blow which crashed down, shaking the walls of the arena. Bounding off the middle of the wall, Hinzay came back at his opponent, having taken the higher ground from himself now, and he struck down with his half-sword. And so it was, this humble blade, forged by a slave in Duke Ikoro's work pits, who'd spat his hatred into the cooling metal as he worked it. The broken sword snapped to the left side of the handguard of the sovereign sword of Korstraad, biting into the hand of the king. That sword, forged by the very hand of Moradin for the defense of the Winter Palace. Perhaps its flawless metal knew that it could fulfill its duty in that moment only by breaking. And so it broke. The hand of Devonus bled, but was not severed, even by a blow which broke dwarven steel, even as he dropped the hilt, recoiling in unfamiliar pain and unquenchable hatred. He reached out with his other hand, but too late, for Hinzay had plucked it from the ground, and now advanced on the king with the sovereign sword in one hand and the faithful half-blade in the other. Devonus roared at the insult, privately cursing the craftsmanship of Moradin for allowing him to be wounded so. But even as he bled, the monstrous strength in his damaged hand seemed undiminished. He sprung back towards the wall and struck the stone with a crash, sending cracks from its foundation to the audience's bleachers, and causing the nearest pillar to fall. Hinzay dodged the pillar easily as it struck the ground and shattered into 3 pieces. But even his steely gaze faltered as his opponent grasped the longest fragment of the pillar and raised it as some obscene distortion of a weapon. 3 feet in diameter and longer than 2 men's height, Devonus clutched the massive stone club between his arms and brought it down savagely. The red sash rolled out of the way, then dodged another gigantic blow, but sprung to his feet and braced himself. And as the pillar rose for a 3rd strike, Hinzay leapt towards it, lashed out with the sword of Korstraad, and cracked the stone column. A heavy chunk of stone toppled back to earth, crushing the king beneath its weight. Even pinned to the ground under the crushing mass of stone, Devonus refused to die, spouting curses that shocked the onlookers, casting doom upon all men, and raving about how he would turn this palace and all nations to rubble, until Hinzay beheaded the tyrant with the sovereign sword, and silence settled over the arena. Despite a peasant's movement to crown him, Hinzay refuses the throne of Korstraad, returning it to the rightful heir, King Monoril IV, who in turn grants the nomadic tribes free passage through all the lands of Korstraad in perpetuity. And so the nomadic tribes have lived and hunted for centuries, at peace with the elves and the 3 brother nations, though to this day many still call them barbarians. Ever since the passing of the Red Sash, Hinzay's tribe have been known as the Vin Hinzay, in honor of the warrior who restored order to Korstraad and cemented peace between the tribes and the city dwellers.